Hello there, I'm Fernanda Paiva, Hitchhiking Stars, and we're here to talk about the full moon. So, the full moon that will be happening on the 29th of June 2026. I mean, if you are in Europe and potentially other places in the world like New Zealand, this full moon is actually happening in the early hours of the 30th of June. So, full moon happening at 8 degrees Capricorn. So Capricorn full moon right off the bat of a new moon in Gemini that we talked about already. So a new moon that had a lot to do about balancing dualities, in particular the intellect and the emotional side. Now we have another emphasis on balancing duality. But here we're going to be talking about something more practical. So full moon in Capricorn obviously is illuminating. It's a combination. It's something that becomes very obvious, very big, very much under the spotlight of a Capricorn flavor. Now, Capricorn does have a lot to do with structures, with a pathway to get what we want, to get our ambitions and our accomplishments, right? It has to do with organizing ourselves and creating structures that will allow us to get somewhere, right? Nothing is just a coincidence when it comes to the Capricorn energy. It really does have that feeling of climbing a ladder. But we talk a lot about this side of Capricorn, right? The goat climbing the mountain, the ambitions, the career-oriented kind of energy of Capricorn. But I suspect that we overly emphasize this side of Capricorn because of the society that we live in. That's very much a workaholic society, right? Work is always, hard work is always a kind of a, when you tell someone that you can't do something because you're busy is widely much more acceptable than if you say you can't do it because you need a rest, right? So I have a feeling that we overly emphasize this side of Capricorn for this reason. Because where we come from, this is super accepted and encouraged. Whereas Capricorn is also about the sea goat. And that's a side of Capricorn that's not talked about so much. And I feel that this full moon is really about balancing the duality in connection to that symbolism. Much more than just the traditional ways that we talk about Capricorn. So Capricorn as the sea goat is a goat at the top and a fish at the bottom. And that does represent a much more spiritual side of the sign of Capricorn. Now, Capricorn being the final sign of Earth, and all the final signs of each one of the elements have a much more collective energy, has a much more spiritual, if you will, energy, because we're talking about the 12th, the 11th, the 10th, and the 9th house. Those houses are naturally associated with the final signs of each one of the elements. And they are placements in the chart that has a much more spiritual inclination or a social inclination or a collective inclination. So with Capricorn as a sea goat, we are also talking about duality as we were with the new moon in Gemini. But here we're talking about duality that is about material accomplishments and a spiritual path, a spiritual mission as well. We're not just talking about our material ambitions. And I see this reflected in a lot of the chart here. In particular, the main aspect that this full moon is making here in the chart, I have the chart in front of me, is a square, so 90 degrees to the midpoint, to the exact middle path between Neptune at 4 degrees Aries and Saturn at 14 degrees Aries. So this full moon is forming a square right in between these two, which also represent the two sides of the sea goat, right? With Saturn talking about reality checks, what we can actually do in this life, right? There's no such a thing as a free meal. You get what you paid for. And, all those things are very Saturnian, very skeptical, very down to earth. But the other side here is Neptune. So it's the middle between the two. It's the middle ground. Now, what does the middle ground represent? Other than a balance, we meet me halfway, right? We're gonna honor the two sides. So the other side here is Neptune, which is the modern ruler of Pisces, and is all about transcendence, is all about spirituality. Really, that sense of interconnection with everything, and the longings for the Garden of Eden, the longing to go back to the womb, to go back to union, divine union, where all of this is an illusion, right? So the full moon is in square to these middle, right between the skepticism of Saturn, there's nothing beyond, you get what you paid for, and the longings to go back to the Garden of Eden of Neptune. So for me, this is a wonderful imagery here symbolically of this chart, that this full moon is really about finding the middle ground. Have you been focusing too much on the spirit world and forgetting about your human needs for security, for material comfort, for, accomplishing things, or creating a structure that will allow you to express that spiritual life more effectively? Or have you been focusing on Saturn too much? And it's all about the hard work, the structure, the denial of pleasures, and forgetting about that sense of connection that Neptune is talking about. So really, the image of the sea goat is very, very relevant for this full moon, and how we can bring the balance between that. Now, another aspect in this full moon is Mars. So we have Mars at 0 degrees Gemini, recently, moved to that sign, and it's forming a square to the north and the south node, both at 1 degrees Pisces north node and 1 degree Virgo in the south node. And the lunar nodes have that incredible connection to spiritual growth as well. And for me, that Mars in square to the north and the south node in this particular full moon really is talking about manifesting divine will. How do we do that? How do we fully incarnate Saturn without forgetting our spiritual mission, Neptune? Without forgetting that we're all interconnected. How do we set boundaries, Mars and Saturn, without forgetting that we're all together in this, that we're all part of the same, that we're all, spiritual beings having a human experience, Neptune, right? Is the balance between the two. And when it comes to a balance, it really is reliant on how you've been living so far. Are you more Neptunian? Do you have a lot of Pisces in your chart? Have you been giving a lot more rise to the Neptune side of this equation and forgetting the Saturn? Or are you more of a Capricorn time with Saturn on the ascendant, etc., and you're being very boundaried and walled up? And it is about dissolving a little bit of those boundaries now for growth. So this is very important. And this is really massive with this full moon here. That sense of duality and that imagery of the sea goat. So another aspect here, or another important, there are a couple of important movements here that towards the end of June, obviously, when this full moon is happening, we're going to be witnessing and going through. One is that Mercury is retrograde, and Mercury would have been retrograde a little earlier on the day of the full moon. So we're really seeing this change of direction here on the day of the full moon. And full moons, again, is about illumination, is about awareness. Mercury is going retrograde at 26 degrees Cancer, which is ruled by the moon. So Is this full moon about taking action and moving forward and telling people about the insights you're having? Probably not. This full moon is a lot more introspective, is a lot more about realizing things, reassessing things, rethinking things, right? Writing it down, rereading your journals, really taking a look at what you're doing with these two sides, with that Neptune and that Saturn and that middle ground. How have you been practicing that middle ground? With Mercury in Cancer, obviously, is ruled by the moon, so it has a connection with this full moon in Capricorn as well. But it is retrograde, like I said, recently turned retrograde, and not too far from Jupiter. So I feel there is a promise here with this full moon of realizing something important in a very intuitive way. So pay attention. And with Cancer, Mercury retrograde in Cancer, it will be a lot more subtle. It's not necessarily going to be a clear light bulb moment. Bam! It will be more like subtle. It will be feelings. It will be moods. It will be in the gut, right? A gut feeling. So pay attention to that. And for the Sabin symbol, we have an imagery here of an angel carrying a harp. Again, bringing us to that sea goat side of Capricorn. So it's a full moon that's very, very spiritual in nature. And with the angel carrying a harp, we're talking about music. We're talking about divine music or divine harmony, right? Angels are usually associated with protection as well. So potentially there's a little bit of that. But heavenly peace, spiritual ascension, rhythm. Music is about rhythm. But with an angel, it's about divine rhythm. So how can we access the divine rhythm? Are we dancing according to the divine rhythm? Or are we not? Are we removed from it? Are we far away from it? Important things during this full moon. So how can we align our material ambitions with our spiritual inner life? And honor both, not just one or the other, right? Honor both, our material needs and our spiritual needs. They're both important. When it comes to the tarot, what we have is the Devil card. Again, another card talking about that duality of, the illusions of materialism. But the Devil card is a very welcoming card when we need to be grounded. When we need to put our feet on the ground as well. So the other cards associated with Capricorn are the 2, the 3, and the 4 of Pentacles. So those are cards connected to Capricorn. And again, Pentacles, obviously Earth, and Capricorn will have that connection with groundedness. But don't forget the sea goat imagery here as well. And in particular, I think the 3 of Pentacles can show us that. When the Rider-Waite deck, at least, where they're working on the church. So there is still that connection. It's working and building something that's also for the divine. That also has a connection with the divine, right? So that's it. This is all the information I had to share with you about this coming full moon. I hope that you have a wonderful realization here and that you find a way to honor and to bring to life that imagery of the sea goat. And have a beautiful time. And I will be speaking to you all soon. So take care. Bye-bye now.